everybody. A very good evening to you guys. So as the 2021 Singapore FinTech Festival continues, we are proud to have been part of and facilitated some great conversations about FinTech and its impact, especially in the realm of ESG. I'm Lynette here, a venture lead for SC Ventures, and I focus on advancing ESG integration standards and spearheading collaborative ventures with industries. Today, I'll be a moderator for this podcast, and we'll be talking about ESG from the perspective of a financial institution, as well as how BFSI players can contribute to the ecosystem. We know that the banks play a critical role in driving the ESG agenda because we are responsible for capital availability, movement, allocation, and investment, and finance underpins just about every sector in every country. There's an increased expectations for banks to step up in leading positive changes, and many are answering the call. So we are also increasingly integrating ESG into our risk assessment processes and policies. But this is only just the start of the journey. ESG needs to be holistic integration that forms the foundation of a corporate and regulatory policy for it to be able to engage a truly positive shift. So for today, we have Pierre over here, who is our Group Chief Data Officer at Standard Chartered Bank. We have Vijay, which is the Head of Data Management Risk at Standard Chartered Bank. And we have Mohammed Rahim, who's very kindly joined us. He's the Global Head of Design and Monitoring Data Management, and he's sitting in London right now. So very lovely, and thank you for having you guys over here for today. And with that, I would like to maybe have a little bit of introductions about each of you guys before we can kickstart with the video that introduces the rest of the team. Yeah, so could we start with you, Pierre? Maybe a little bit something about yourself.
Sure, yeah. So I'm Pierluigi Culazzo, Group Chief Data Officer for Standard Chartered. Joined the company this year in April, facing all the challenges of moving across continent and country and changing company job in the middle of a global pandemic. And I'm really pleased to be here. And there's a lot of work that we are doing in the AI space, and at the same time, we are, as you know, sustainability is part of our corporate agenda, so we're really all passionate and looking forward to work together and make our own contribution.
Thank you, Pierre. And actually, he's very humble. He has more than 20 years of experience now in large, complex technology and financial companies to deliver profitable growth and shareholder value internationally. So next, Vijay, would you like to share with us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Vijay Jairaj. I'm the head of data management risk for the responsible use of AI in the bank. And in this capacity, I set and define the standards and policies for the use of AI. Been with the bank for just over a decade, almost 11 years now, across various roles covering data and, of course, most recently, AI. Sustainability is part of our DNA, as you would have seen from the various sessions we've been running. So looking forward to the rest of the session.
Thank you, Vijay. He's also spoken about a lot of topics, including industrial AI adoption and the proper governance in 2021 RegTech Innovation Summit. So next we have Mohammed Rahim, which is the Global Head Design Monitoring Data. Maybe you could share with us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Lynette. Likewise, very excited to be here and part of this initiative. I have been with the organization for 15 years, long time, but throughout the 15 years, I've predominantly been in data roles. In my current role, I'm the global head of data management risk. So I own the data management policy for the bank. And underneath that policy, there's a series of standards. One of those standards is responsible AI, as Vijay pointed out. So again, very excited and happy to contribute to this discussion and the agenda.
It's great that we have this very strong team here today to share with us about data and how ESG and sustainability forms part of the core of Standard Chartered strategy and the areas that we are totally committed to drive further through our processes, policies, ventures, partnerships, and definitely through data. So maybe we could share the video of the other team members in our very strong data team in Standard Chartered Bank right now.
Hi there, I'm David Whiting, the Group Chief Operating, where amongst other things, I spend a lot of time focusing on how I can work with our teams to transform our business and focus on being extremely relevant to our clients and relevant in the communities where we operate. Naturally, this agenda should also include our role in sustainability and ESG. With that in mind, one of the things that is front of mind is, have we thought about the data and the systems that we need as this ESG world puts new obligations on us? Have we built the capability to identify the challenges and take advantage of the opportunities that it presents for our business? It's a very, very big task, and a lot of exciting opportunities lie ahead. And in my mind, data and AI play a key role in that.
Hi, my name is Christian Schwartz, and I'm the Global Head of Data Science at Standard Chartered. Our teams of data scientists work together with our stakeholders and clients to co-create and deploy advanced artificial intelligence solutions at scale using responsible AI principles, standards, and frameworks. This is core to our values, and we are proud to say that we're at the forefront of responsible AI.
My name's Tracy McDermott. I'm the Group Head of Conduct for Standard Chartered. I've also been responsible for our net zero work, setting out our plan as to how we will reach net zero. And for that reason, the topic of ESG and data and how we can use AI to improve it is really close to my heart. The availability of data is going to be a critical point in ensuring that we can all measure, manage and ultimately reduce emissions, whether on an individual or a corporate level. So I'm very excited to see what we're doing in this space. Wish you all the best of luck for the festival.
Thank you for the lovely video, and maybe we could kickstart with Mo sharing with us about the impact of the AI and data in the ESG ecosystem space with a little slide that he has prepared, and that could set the theme for the conversations that's going to flow right after this.
Thank you, Lynette. And you've just heard from three very different individuals from our organization. You've heard from a data scientist, you've heard from the head of compliance, and you've heard from the CEO of Standard Chartered Bank. So the overriding message there is this is a collective agenda. It's not something that we can do on our own. So if you have a look at this whole entire ecosystem in front of you, you can see it's quite complicated, but it's actually a lot more simple, right? So you've got banks at the center who have pressure from investors, who have pressure from regulators, and who have pressure from within to meet to achieve their ESG agenda, right? Now, if you go right, just to the right of that, you will see that the bank is exposed to emissions ESG in two ways, right? Scope 1 and 2 emissions, which is largely banks' own contributions and the impact that has on the larger community. And then scope 3, otherwise known as financed emissions, which is the emissions produced by our clients, right? And what we're financing our clients effectively. Now, what that eventually does is it has an impact on society at large, some of our lifestyle choices, how we consume energy, and how we act, whether we act responsibly or not responsibly, right? And to underpin all of this, to really understand how we're financing our clients and how the impact we're having on society at large, the key enabler in all of this will be data. So you'll see data at the bottom, data we get through rating agencies, data that we receive from disclosures made by clients on their emissions. So this ecosystem sets the scene for our discussion that we're going to have over the course of the next 30 minutes. So Lynette, I will hand back over to you now, and we'll draw reference to this slide as we go through the discussion for today.
Thank you, Mo. That's a very clear, good overall picture that we are getting to set the tone. And maybe we could engage Vijay. I'd like to check with you something. In your experience, what can we do to encourage the right disclosures on ESG? This is not so much a finger point, but it's just to ensure that we're able to get better pricing in the space itself for the clientele. So maybe you could share with us your perspective.
Sure, that's actually a pretty deep question, quite a bit to unpack there, because if you're talking of encouraging the right disclosures for ESG, a couple of things we need to recognize. One, ESG is a very young field. When you compare it with something like, say, financial disclosures, or you compare it with credit ratings, for example, those have been around for much longer. Yeah. ESG disclosures are much newer now. Secondly, we have to look at what are the motives, what are the motivations for companies to make these disclosures, and what's the kind of friction that companies encounter while making these disclosures, and what can we do in order to reduce that friction and encourage disclosures. So what is it that drives companies to make ESG disclosures? There is what I call as a push factor. You have regulators requiring disclosures on ESG aspects. For example, in some jurisdictions, you have the need to disclose gender pay gap related information at a corporate level. So you have regulators pushing for it. So there is a push that you're making as a company. For example, a wealth manager who's looking to shortlist a series of fund offerings for their client wants to know the ESG impact of each of those funds, and that forces the asset management house as well as the companies they are investing in to make those disclosures. So you have this push factor, which pushes companies to make those disclosures. You also have the pull factor, because one, there is an element of pride, there's an element of showcasing that companies are doing well in terms of ESG. Two, they get access to additional channels of funding because they can claim they have greener credentials and so on. So you have a pull factor which makes it attractive. They may also be open to receiving subsidies on the basis of some of their ESG disclosures. So these are the kind of factors that will encourage. So you have these push and pull factors that encourage it. Is it all easy and green? No, it is not. You have a lot of challenges and friction as well when it comes to disclosures. One is, as someone who is publishing disclosures, there are a multitude of standards available in the market, multitude of goals, targets that you could potentially align with. You have the United Nations SDG, you have the TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Disclosure. You have the Sustainability Accounting Board. And even today, I came across a new standard that was announced by the ICC for sustainable trade finance. So you have multiplicity of standards. You also have what I call the dichotomy of data. On the one hand, you have so much data available. You look at any of the ESG reports, they go into maybe 50 pages, 100 pages, and you have a lot of information. You have other data coming in terms of weather data, satellite data, sensors from companies in terms of how much you're emitting and so on and so forth. However, it's a huge challenge to actually get all that data together and compute your own scope 3 emissions. So you have the dichotomy. You have a lot of data available, but you're not able to actually use that data effectively and convey those convey the right level of
It's about making
emissions.
sense of all the data that we're pulling in from various sources. And that's the big challenge, actually.
Absolutely. And the last point you mentioned about not being able to finger point, there is always the concern that you may take a reputational hit. Because of the multitude of data that's available, people may focus on one or two numbers and say that your emission levels are very high or whatever, and not look at the trajectory of those emissions, that they're going down. And you may be targeted for the wrong reasons. So these are some of the challenges or the friction that is there when it comes to ESG disclosures. And how do you actually address this and encourage greater and right disclosures? One is, of course, more data. And it is not about more data from the same source, it's about collaborating across the industries. For example, if you want to compute your scope 3 emissions on mortgages, you need to get energy data from the utility companies. So one is more data. The other is the use of AI to make sense of these disparate sources of data, to try and triangulate data across multiple sources. What is right? Is it accurate? And that would help it. And of course, most importantly, it is about being able to make sense of the data, where again AI will help you. So I have this much data. Can I cluster companies with a particular behavior, identify outliers, and see are those to be emulated, or do I have an opportunity to change the trajectory of their emissions? So these are some of the key areas. I hope I was able to give you a
That's
comprehensive
very,
answer.
very comprehensive answer. You literally covered quite a fair bit of points that is actually troubling a lot of people. And I think that's very concise about how data can actually come into play in the ESG space. That's excellent. Great sharing, actually, Vijay. Thank you. So maybe over to Mo, could I check with you maybe, how do you think, because we talked so much about the different kind of data and the various sources, the new frameworks, the accounting standards, and we've got certifications and all on top of it, right? So how important do you think is the standardization of data in this whole ESG journey? Is it really crucial, the level of importance, and why do you think that way?
Yeah, thanks, Lynette. I'm going to expand upon what Vijay said. Obviously, it's very important that we make sure we're not here to finger point, but we use data in the right way. And we use data as a force for good, and that's really what this presentation is about, and that's what we're trying to do as an organization as well. But let me first start by explaining why the lack of standardization might be a problem, right? So there was a report from 2016, well, in 2016, from the Global Institute of Sustainability that said as of 2016, there were 120 ESG data providers, right? That went up to more than 600 by the end of 2019. So you can already see why it is a problem, right? There's a multitude of data providers, there's a multitude of interpretations, and there's a multitude of the ways we disclose. So what problem does that cause? Well, the first thing is we can't compare the disclosures, right? If you're disclosing emissions in a certain way compared to the way Pierre is doing it, compared to the way Vijay is doing it, it's very difficult to compare, right? Who are the ones we want to finance more? And secondly, to Vijay's point, it becomes even more difficult to see where your behavioral changes are improving over time, because if your behaviors are improving, but the data it's difficult to interpret the data, we can't encourage that behavior by financing more. You see what I mean? So it's important from the perspective of we can't compare disclosures if we don't have standardized data. Second one is we can't compare the ratings. Now, if the rating agencies, you've heard if there's 600 plus, how do we compare that? How do we make sense of that? How do we interpret that? And how do we use that to make decisions on financing potential prospect clients of ours on scope 3, right? And then the final piece is if we don't have standardized data, we won't be able to make proper decisions on outcomes. Who are we financing? What is the impact on the larger community as well? What is the impact on lifestyle? So we won't be able to measure whether our decisions are actually having an impact, right? So I actually believe just like revenue is the lifeblood, quote unquote, of a company, I believe that data is the lifeblood of getting ESG right. And for the reasons that I've just explained, right? We know that the MES is working on a project right now to try and look at how we harmonize and standardize data, which is a really good step forwards. But if we standardize the data in the way companies are disclosing their emissions, the way agencies are providing ratings in the same way we have for credit ratings, for example, in the way we interpret that data, the way we're aggregating the data, it allows us to make the right decisions on who to finance, when to potentially pull back, and to measure whether this ESG journey is a success on society or not. So it brings about greater accuracy, it brings about greater confidence, greater reliability, and also transparency. I'm making a decision to finance a specific company based on a rating that I understand, based on a disclosure that I understand and can interpret. So it really is crucial that the standardization of data becomes the forefront of our ESG agenda.
Okay. Thank you for sharing and highlighting how important this part is. I'm sure it's something that we have to take into consideration, and regulatories and various boards are looking into it. So maybe coming to you, Pierre. This is a very important question. What is the role of AI in the ESG journey, as we are all trying to make sense of all the data that's flowing in, right? And how AI is going to help us be champions in this space, which is really very new, and there's a lot of the nuances that we are trying to deal with.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I would decompose it in two, probably. One is what's the role of data, and then how AI can accelerate the learning. I think the role of data is basically to create awareness. Because we all need to know where we start, what's our baseline, and it will be helpful to understand what's our individual footprint, right? So we know on average that if we live in Singapore, each of us contribute about 8 tons of CO2 per year, and then you can compare with maybe UK, US, and other countries. But that's not really something you can relate. You understand ton is a lot, but it's not something meaningful.
It's not contextual.
It's not very contextual.
Yeah.
So I like to get more into practical example, and I do love driving classic cars two or three times a year.
Okay.
And my daughters and my friends sometimes they flag me like if I was the biggest source of climate change in the world. So I try always to put things in perspective. And as a revenge, I look at how many streaming movie my daughter has been downloading in the last 18 months. And she downloaded 952 hours of movies in 18 months.
May I know how old is she again?
15.
Okay.
It's quite aligned with the average.
Yeah.
And that corresponds to 320 kilograms of CO2 to go through that process and to streamline, right?
Oh, wow, okay.
So if you put in context, that's kind of similar to having 200, almost 300 cycle of a washing machine. But because she was bringing the example of the car, it's equivalent of a car driving for about 2,200 kilometers, which is much more
Right.
than my 3 rides a year. And that's, for me, is important because it gives perspective to people, and people can relate to how much is their footprint, right? My other friends instead downloaded 1,840 hours in 4 years, which correspond to 620 kilograms. Okay. And that's basically, if you put it in context, you need to plant 13,500 trees to compensate that, right? So when you start to think in this way, data role is to create awareness. AI is more to solve the hardest problem. If we think about how we use AI in daily life, AI is already in the middle of the way we do search, we do shopping online, we travel, and we learn, and we create education. So if you think about 2 big sources of CO2 footprint, transportation and energy, just to bring 2 of them. So on the transportation, of course, you can use AI to improve smart city, and reduce, for example, imagine historically when we choose to move from London to Paris, we look at what are the options, how long does it take, and how much does it cost. Yeah. But you can add another element, which is which one is the eco-friendly area, and which one is the eco-friendly area based on the traffic condition, based on what's going on, based on a lot of things. You need AI to do that, right? Or even within a city, you can have 3 different routes, and you can choose the eco-friendly one as long as you don't double the time, right? So all those things can be implemented using AI. This is an example. The other one is you can even optimize traffic lights to a certain extent, and having less people waiting with the engine in idle and etc. Right? So if you only can integrate and use the data we've been talking before. Another analogy would be energy. So we talked about smart city. You can talk about smart houses. And when I was living in London, I had to worry about the heating. Here, I had to worry about the air conditioning. But the question is always like, do I need the heating on all the time? Do I need the air conditioning on all the time? And if you have if you use more technology and more data to understand your pattern when you're at home, when you need to have the air conditioning on, you can just use your appliances and everything that you consume on a daily basis in a more smart way, in a more efficient way. Now, the final point is that all of those are small changes, right, which contribute some kilograms of CO2 here and there. But the key is to understand that we are a billion of people that can make an impact. So when you multiply small changes times billions of people, then you have a big impact for the planet.
Yeah, that's true. I sure love the way you storytell about the data and how it comes around. It actually makes someone very, very aware. It's in my mind, I could see these pictures popping up. If you're traveling from here to here, this is what is happening. This is how much carbon you're emitting. And that's when you actually contextualize it and people realize it and the importance of AI to optimize what we have on this planet at the end of the day. So I love the way you tell the story. Really, really good. So maybe, in view of time, I could ask you another question. Like, if we're going to look at this defensive view of sustainability, now. What are the privacy concerns that could exist, and how can we overcome it? Because with AI, that comes with a lot of detection. People are concerned about it, so it would be great to learn from your perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, it's another great question because data privacy and it's a very important topic, not just for sustainability or just for AI in general.
Yeah.
And we all need to recognize that today the consumer are developing a higher privacy IQ. They understand what company are doing with the data. They get less comfortable if they don't know what's happening, right? So to summarize, I think every time I think about data privacy, I think about three things, right? One is transparency, one is consent, and the other one is shared value. To summarize, by transparency, I mean it's key that when we are going to collect the data for whatever purposes, whether it's sustainability or anything else, we are very clear about what we're going to use the data for, and also we are clear about what we will never do with those data. But transparency is a concept that needs to be a little bit more elaborated, right? We don't want the old way of doing this, which is we wrote 200 pages documents of terms and conditions, and we told you on page 156 that we were going to do that. We need to be really transparent. So in very few words, I should give you the confidence that if you share data with me, they are safe and we're doing the right things and what we're doing for.
Yeah.
The second point, it's trust. The whole system is based on trust.
It's like any human communication, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So to build that trust, I think is important also, once I told you that I give you a tool that you can manage the consent you gave me. Because today you can say, okay, I agree, you can use this data for this purpose, but tomorrow maybe you may change your mind.
Yeah.
And if you empower you to make those choices and to change your settings at any time, you will trust me more. And then you will feel in control, and then you will be willing to share more data. So that's the second point.
Yep.
And the last one, which I think is always true, is people are understand that if someone uses their data, it's for some kind of benefit, and they want a slice of the benefit. So this is really important also to work around what's the shared value, right? We're gonna build together a way to navigate the city in a more smart way. I'm going to use your data, but you will be having the choice to prioritize what matters most to you. If it's sustainability, you're going to have that. You're going to save time, you're going to save money, whatever. So I think I'm looking at those three dimensions that we need to work all together in the ecosystem to make sure that the consumer trusts everybody that uses data and they do something with it.
It's interesting. It's actually the base core of humanity. We're talking about trust and the respect, so that I actually have the permissions released as and when I want to.
Yeah.
And it's the same value system that we want something better for the future, which is why we are doing this, which is also a mutual crucial communications, basically.
I agree.
Yeah, this is really interesting how real life actually translates into data and how it comes about, right? So this is really good discussions. Maybe the next one I could direct it at Mo over there. Since we'd like to know maybe a little bit about what are the obstacles that prevent us from moving forward in our ESG agenda. Yeah.
Thanks, Lynette. Another very important question. Now, Pierre spoke about his daughter and himself, and comparing and contrasting themselves, which I've found fascinating. And actually, it's a large part of that is my answer, and a lot of it is to do with transparency. Well, it's three things effectively. It's our mindset, it's behavioral changes, and knowledge, right? Now, what do I mean by those three things? So firstly, knowledge. Not everybody understands the whole concept of ESG well enough, right? There was an article in the Financial Times from the beginning of the year, which actually said a number of relationship managers or financial advisors, when they sit down with their clients, they only ask them one question. They only know one question to ask, and that is, okay, are you interested in sustainable investing? And why is that an obstacle? Well, because they don't have the right framework or the right questions to ask. Why? Because they don't have the right data. And it links back to the whole data story. If you don't have standardized data, if you don't have data that makes sense and you can interpret, and if it's not transparent what you're using the data for, then you're not able to ask the right questions when you're sitting in front of your clients. So one of the biggest obstacles is knowledge. We need to build up the knowledge of what is ESG, right? Both from a data perspective and actually to our front line, sales staff and relationship managers, and also to demystify some of the jargon. There's a lot of jargon in ESG, and we need to be using data as a force for good to try and to make it easier to understand, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is mindset. Now, Pierre spoke. I loved his analogy where he's not the bad guy just because he's driving his sports car 3 times a year, and it's the same with a lot of the companies. Everyone, I think, we have to consciously understand that everyone understands that ESG is an important topic, and we have to realize that not everybody is bad, and everybody is trying to move towards an ESG, a sustainable way of investing, a sustainable way of financing, both in the community, both from a bank financing, and both our clients from actually producing Scope 3 emissions that we're exposed to. So not everybody is bad, but we need to be able to measure their incremental progress, right? How much are they getting better? And we need to use data to be able to encourage and drive the right behavior. Just like PS said, his daughter, downloads X hours of Netflix, which produces X ton of carbon emissions. We need to be able to measure that. Okay, if it's 1 ton today, has it come down? So it's not like measuring them badly, but measuring them in a positive way, that they are actually getting better and encouraging that. So mindset is the second one. And the third one is measuring behavioral changes. This is a big obstacle. We need to be able to see whether behaviors are constantly getting better over time using data, right? So is downloading the same amount of videos from Netflix producing the same emissions? Or are we finding better ways to do that? Just as an example. So these are the 3 things that are the key obstacles, and where we can use data to try and solve for that.
Thanks for sharing that. I can see and hear a lot of obstacles in a way, but we will definitely get past it one by one. Maybe since we're talking about carbon and with the recent COP26 that's coming up, we know that moving towards net zero is here to stay. And how important is data in enabling this? Maybe Vijay can help us shed some light in this matter.
Sure. I'm trying to think, is that an easy question to answer, or is it a difficult one to answer? Because off the bat, I can just say it's very important, because that's what it is.
Yeah.
But if we dig into the detail, what is it that we want to measure in terms of going towards net zero? That's a very important point. So you will start off by measuring where we are in terms of carbon emissions. So if you take a hypothetical company, it could be a green tech or a clean tech company, which enables other companies to become green and reduce their emissions. Or it could be an industry which is polluting today. Okay. However, that alone is not enough. We need the data to assess what their plans are, what is the kind of capital investment they are making to reduce their carbon emissions. What is the trajectory of their emissions going forward? We need data for that. We need data to be able to project the emissions and assess whether they are actually aligning with those projections. So if you cannot measure it, there is no way you're going to be able to see where you are. If you do not have the data, there is no way you'll be able to know whether you've reached the destination, whether you're headed in the right direction, or you're going away from net zero in a completely different direction. So to me, the importance of data in our journey towards net zero it's fundamental. You can't do it without it. You can't do without it. Few key points which Mo mentioned, and I also really liked Pierre's example. Most points about standardizing the data that you're receiving. He referenced multiple rating agencies and so on. That again would form the lifeblood of what we do to measure our journey towards net zero. And Pierre's examples, of course, is the ability to use the data to bring to life the stories and demonstrate that you're actually heading in the right direction towards net zero. So going back to the early part of the question, it's actually a very simple answer. It is very important. And depending on how deep you get into it, the importance of the data can be explained.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure it's very important because we need data to be able to measure, and only when we're able to measure, then we're able to manage. So, and then that's along the way where the importance of AI all comes in to deal with all the influx of all the data that we're having and making sense of all this. So I know time is running out, so there's a couple of questions, so maybe we can get around to the questions itself that the audience has put out, and we'll love answers from all three of you guys. One of the things would be, in your experience, do you have some suggestions for the adoption, implementation, and education for banks or other financial institutions that are looking to incorporate ESG into their practices? It's a very long question, I'm sorry. Yeah, would you want me to repeat that one again? So, like, do you have suggestions on how banks or financial institutions can actually adopt, implement, and educate using data to incorporate ESG into their practices?
Yeah, I think it's first of all, from my perspective, there's an education piece, and there's a phase that everybody need to go through and understand that why this is important, right? Mm-hmm. Because there's a data-driven way of looking at things, but mm-hmm. also we need to get over some of the hurdle that Mo has been describing before, etc. Mm-hmm. I think so. There's the education first, mm-hmm. to understand strategically how this is going to fit into the plan of the bank. Mm-hmm. And most of the bank, including Standard Chartered, has four main pillars in the core strategy, and one of those is sustainability, because we understand that that's the way to go forward. Mm-hmm. That's the way we want to push forward. Yeah. And the third one is back to the old discussion of, how do we measure the progress we make, and how do we make tangible mm-hmm. the benefit for the society, for the bank, for the ecosystem that Mo has been describing before. Mm-hmm. So I would say like in three phases, right? The education, mm-hmm. the adoption more from removing the obstacle and understand how strategically fits into what we want to achieve. And third, the old metrics and the old way we're going to check regularly whether we're moving in the right direction and pitching to ourselves and to everybody else in the ecosystem what are the benefits and why this is the way to go. So it's not an easy journey, but of course we are all like in a space now that we understand it has to be done. We all understand we're running out of time. And so we better get on with it, and
yes, we should,
and learn over our journey, right? So that would be my kind of advice on how to move.
That's
forward.
very good. And how to overall we should look into educating, initiating, adopting, and then we can accelerate and really fly, right? Yeah, so it makes a lot of sense on how data can fit.
I think it's space. Really important also that nobody feels alone, right? Because it's to Vijay's point is kind of it's all relative. I mean, we've been talking about climate change for a number of years, but we never saw so much focus as now. Mm-hmm. And nobody need to feel like I'm on my own. I'm the first mover. I'm going to take a lot of risk. There is also a realization that we need to all agree on that. We all need to work together to move this agenda forward. And so there is no risk in being the first one, right? We just need to
I should say that we're very cushioned now because we have the data availability. People know how important it is. Yeah. We have the regulators in place. We have finance as a push. Yeah. We have also the consumer that has also looked beyond what we need to do and move further ahead, right? Yeah.
And if you think how the awareness is also being created is showing the data.
Yes, that's when you have the trust and the respect, right?
Yeah, and I would add that our stands actually make a big difference because they kind of shine a spotlight on the need to actually focus on this topic. And that's a very powerful message coming in all the way from the top, and it's percolating all the way down to the bottom. And that's going to get tied back to the way we do our jobs on a day-to-day basis, use the data to tell the stories around net zero, around sustainability, and so on. So I think that's a very powerful
It is very powerful. I think we need to learn Pierre's way of telling a story too.
Yes.
I would not forget that story that he has shared with us. It's amazing, right? So another question that was being raised was like, is there a difference in the data points that's being pulled out on a project basis or on an overall organizational well-being basis? Because I think what the audience meant to ask would be, I might be doing this because this is one of the projects, one of the baby steps that I'm taking on to move towards a net zero, or my commitment towards carbon or ESG, social governance. But I might be doing it overall at the end. Are there differences in the data points that I have to submit so that people actually are aware of it? I think that was what he was trying to ask. Yeah.
I would say that it would vary depending on the project and the kind of jurisdiction you're working in. For example, if you're looking at computing your scope 3 emissions on your retail mortgage book, the way you would go about it, the kind of data points you would look for, and the kind of data points you would report on that would be very different. From, say, you're trying to do the same activity on your real estate book on the corporate side or on the logistics side. So the kind of data points you're looking at are going to be very different. And what you're ultimately trying to measure your scope 3 emissions, yes, but it's going to be very different even for sectors of industry, for geographies. For example, Pierre was talking about air conditioning versus heating. So your carbon emissions for real estate across those two jurisdictions are going to be very different. And the way you analyze them are also going to be different. The way you report them are going to be different. So yes, you're going to have different set of data points. You're going to analyze different set of data points, and you're going to report a different set of data points towards the same goal.
Okay.
So I hope I've answered the right question there,
You
because
did.
it's a bit of a complex question.
It's a very complex question. I'm sure that the audience will actually put up on LinkedIn and then reach out, and then you guys can answer from there. In fact, this is such a hearty discussion that I didn't realize it's already 6:45. We have actually crossed over the time. Maybe some last takeaways from the three of you gentlemen here for the audience in the house. Is there anything you'd like to share with them further just before we round up this session?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, get involved. So let's not wait. None of us should wait that someone else is going to solve the problem. We need to start from doing our own bits, and then starting locally and then growing this enthusiasm and this journey and this involvement is what's going to make a difference. So stay positive and participate.
Okay. So walk the talk, take action, right? That's what Pierre is trying to tell us. How about yourself, Vijay and Mo?
Yeah, I will add on to Pierre's point. It's about action, and you're not alone. You got to collaborate. You got to collaborate not just within a company or across companies. You got to collaborate across industries as well, in order to ensure that we hit our targets. I mean, it's our future and our children's future, so
Of course.
don't have a choice.
Thank you. Some last parting words from yourself, Mo?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to quote one of my favorite quotes, which is, the best time to plant a seed was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. And it's the same with the ESG journey. Ideally, we should have started 20 years ago, but we haven't. So let's start now, get involved and do what you can, right? Whether you're one of the individuals contributing to emissions, whether you're part of a bank that's trying to measure scope 3 and emissions, or whether you're a data provider who's looking to standardize data. So you've heard a myriad of different challenges and how we can solve them just by simplifying. Just start now and do, take a step forwards and plant that ESG seed today.
Thank you so much. Dear audience, thank you for your time and for joining us. Please do check out our FinTech Bridge. There's a lot more articles on sustainability and transformative decentralized finance, and also you could connect with other innovation community. And please tune in to the other Singapore FinTech Festival podcast. And I'd like to say thank you very much, Pierre, Vijay, and Mo, and for being such a lovely audience this beautiful Thursday evening in Singapore.